Welcome to the Earth Your Wow podcast, brought to you by Reuserbox, providing a better way to buy cardboard boxes. We're your hosts, Jack and Ellie.
This is the podcast where we talk to industry experts and change makers to try to answer the question, how do we make our businesses better for people and the planet?
So today's guest is Henry Nelson Case, a UK-based lawyer, TEDx speaker and advocate for mental health in the workplace. Henry's journey is a powerful exploration of how toxic masculinity and corporate culture can shape mental health struggles, especially for men. In this conversation, we'll dive into Henry's experiences as a young lawyer navigating mental health challenges, the societal expectations that hold men back from seeking support, and practical ways to foster healthier, more compassionate workplaces. He's delivered talks at Oxford, Cambridge, shared insights on BBC World News, and created relatable, impactful content that's reached millions of people. And now, at the pinnacle of his career, he's on our podcast. So it's great to have
Thanks
you on.
for having me. That was a strong intro. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Henry. Can you start by just talking about your story and what kind of started your journey to posting on TikTok about those experiences?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for me, I'm a qualified lawyer, which I get questioned quite a lot whether or not I actually am a lawyer or if I just work in marketing, but I am a fully qualified lawyer, and I just qualified. And I joined a new role, and in that role, it was me, an equity partner, a salaried partner, and our PA. So there was no sort of middle level employee between sort of me, the junior, and the two partners I worked for. Joined this firm, met some really interesting people, did some great work, but I found that the equity partner I was working for was just so constantly sort of relentless towards me, would challenge whether or not I had a brain, if I could actually do the work, why did they employ me, would shout at me as we walked through the corridors of the open planned office together. And I found myself sort of going down to the bathroom, sort of throwing up, crying, grabbing a coffee, coming straight back to my desk, tapping away. And this was in the first 6 weeks of joining that organization that this stuff started happening. So I remember having my 6-week check-in with HR to find out how I'm settling in. And I was like, oh, by the way, these behaviors have been happening. And to me, they don't seem great, but I just wanted to check that we're all sort of on the same page here. And I remember then going back to my desk and seeing the HR lady's name flash up on his phone, the partner who I sat next to. And I just remember my stomach dropping, thinking that call is now about me. He's going to come back and realize that I've said something awful. And I just sat there at my desk for the rest of the day, headphones on. And this went on for a long time. And it got so bad that I was sort of calling in sick just because I couldn't physically go in, that because I was just so sort of anxious and stressed. But I would take my laptop home with me. And I would still work, but I would just be sort of offline working in the background so I didn't get behind on anything. I just didn't want to be in that environment. And this was pre-lockdown, so working from home wasn't the norm, which is why I had to call in sick. And then it came to sort of, must have been March 2020, pretty much the week before Boris announced the lockdown. And I remember saying to my parents, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't physically get up out of bed. I've never felt so sort of low. This is impacting all other aspects of my life. I just moved from another town to my parents' house for this job, what was supposed to be temporarily. And they said, just quit. We can sort this all out. You'll get another job. But then Boris announced the lockdown. So we quickly spun on that. We said, don't quit, actually. Stick it out. You'll be working from home, so you'll be out of that environment. And then I guess a lot of people, I was watching, this was pre me having TikTok, Instagram reels of people that are now my friend, like Rod, Corporate Natalie, my friend Cruz, all of these other people creating content around working from home and the relatability aspect of it. So then a year later, I changed organizations. I just bought this flat. And I thought, oh, do you know what the heck? I honestly couldn't tell you why. And still to this day, I do not know why I then downloaded TikTok. And thought, I'm going to post a video. I'm a middle child. I'm an only boy. Maybe I just wanted some attention that day. Couldn't tell you. So I downloaded it, made a video, went on a walk, came back, and it seemed to have got quite a bit of traction. I thought, oh, cool. Let's keep doing this. And I kept doing it. And the more I did it, the more I started sharing around experiences that I've had working within the legal profession. And then the more I got messages from people saying, oh, mate, this is me, relate to this, comments saying, oh, mate, me too, which then kind of encouraged me to start sharing more about sort of my own vulnerabilities and sort of things that happen within the legal profession that like just aren't normal or healthy. And then it kind of just snowballed from there.
Hmm. I think it's yeah, I think it's fair to say like sort of toxic workplace culture is incredibly common. You know, I'm sure most people that are listening have experienced it themselves. I'm just kind of wondering, like, why do you think it is so? Why have we created this sort of society where it's acceptable to have companies where that's the norm? Do you think?
Yeah, I feel like because it's almost tolerated in a sense that um, ultimately, as a business, it's there to make money, and there are high pressures on people, regardless of what industry, sector, or role that you have. I find, particularly from my experiences within the legal profession, with like the high billing targets, the client demands X, Y, and Z, it's almost normalized that you will work 12-hour days, you'll work 10-hour days within sort of the legal profession itself, just because that's the way it's always been. That's how your supervisors have had it. That's how you'll have it. And unless you get sort of um, millennials, Gen Zs that go up the ranks and sort of break that cycle, it will just keep going because some people wear this with almost a badge of honor. I remember I went home and then I came back to the office the next day and there were like pizza boxes and everything left out in the kitchen from the people who stayed late last night, closing a deal, doing whatever they were doing. And people were almost proud and boasting, like, oh, there are boxes because we had to get the delivery in because we were here so late. And I just thought, that isn't a life that is healthy. That's not a life that I want to live. So I learned early on that I didn't want to be a partner at a law firm. But in terms of behaviors and the normalization around it, I think a lot of organizations enable this behavior. If I take the partner that I used to work for that um, made my life so difficult, possibly one of the worst working environments I've ever worked in, his behavior was to an extent allowed and permitted because he was the contact, the connect for one of the firm's biggest clients that brought in the most money. And ultimately, it comes back to it being a business. And in comparison to him, my position within that organization is irrelevant. I can be replaced. They could get somebody else in. Whereas the risk of losing that client is so much more valuable to the organization. They would just tolerate whatever he did. And there were some behaviors that outside of just what happened to me that were more broad across the firm that were unhealthy. But it's almost like organizations need to be reflecting on themselves and saying, why are we allowing this? What can we do to stop this? And kind of have that inward looking focus rather than constantly saying the employees can't handle it. They're not made for this environment. They're not cutthroat enough. Because on the flip side, when you work at an organization that you get the best supervision, the best leadership, you really connect with the team, the output, productivity, the joy that those people have within that organization is so much better. And I think if every organization was like that, then we would have this level of like happy, healthy employees. But I think also you're not going to like everybody. You're not going to get on with everybody. But that doesn't mean you have to be rude. You don't have to be dismissive. You don't have to be difficult towards those people. Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot of systemic issues. I think there are a lot of people issues in terms of like, personalities and behaviors. Um, and I think we do have a long way to go to sort of make progress in this space.
Hmm. I think I think we've actually thought about this a lot from the kind of like the employer's perspective, like the kind of the leader manager perspective, because um, yeah, but I think it's kind of interesting that you'd mentioned around thing like companies can be a lot more productive if you get rid of that toxic workplace culture. Um, but I'm just wondering, like, do you like what? Why do you think it is that companies can be more productive if you can cut that out? And also, like, why is it then that companies don't do that? Why is it that the normal isn't to do that if it's more productive? Like it sounds like the law firm you're working for, they were like, well, this guy gets to decide because he brings the most money in. But maybe he could be bringing more money in if he wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think on the point around the productivity, I think it's kind of similar that if, like, personally, I know that if I eat well, I drink water, I exercise, I do like my mental health exercises, whatever it may be, I know that I feel better. I know that I'm going to perform better. If you're working in an organization that um, hires diversely, it encourages you to speak up and openly about things that you disagree with, you agree with, things that you might want to see change. If you actually prioritize employee well-being, if you're not rigid in your structure in terms of how and when people work, as long as client demands and needs are met, um, those employees are going to feel valued. They are going to feel wanted. They are going to um, feel supported and safe, and create that employers create that psychologically safe environment where employees are like, do you know what? Actually, I like where I work. I'm proud to work at this organization. Um, I want to give my all. I see myself growing here, and all of the benefits that come with that. Whereas when I eat badly, when I'm not exercising, when I'm not leaving the house, I don't feel great. So when you have an organization that's not supporting well-being, it doesn't really care what its people are saying. There's a high churn rate. It's very much a top-down approach. You do as you're told. You don't speak up. You may get paid well. You may not get paid well. That also has a huge impact on like employees' sort of well-being as well and how they feel about work. Um, but a lot of organizations perhaps don't want to change because they don't necessarily need to, um, because somebody else will want to work here. Somebody else needs this role. And if you've got one bad apple or perceived bad apple, sorry, it's easier to just get rid of them than it is to overhaul your whole company culture, your whole company ethos, change your leadership, change your structure. So my take would be that's why a lot of organizations just avoid asking themselves a hard question, or in turn just offer sort of tokenistic, meaningless gestures such as a Headspace subscription or a team lunch.
Do you think this could be a generational problem? I'm going to call it a problem because there's the kind of joke about the stressed out millennial, and boomers and Gen X seem to just accept it. But do you think there might be some hope with the younger generation that there's being a bit of pushback now, and people are saying, actually, I don't know though if it's because I've never worked in a corporate, so it's a very different world. But is there any pushback in that corporate world from younger people saying, actually, we don't want to work till 2 a.m. With our delivery because apparently that's what we have to do?
Yeah, I think you're completely right. The sort of the boomer generation um, are very much, we had it this way, you're going to have it that way. And I think we're seeing a lot more now with Gen Z and soon to be Gen Alpha entering the workforce, that they're actually saying, well, what can you offer me? As an employee of your organization, what do you bring to me? It's not seen anymore as sort of a one-way transaction in you should be lucky to be employed. And I think law firms particularly are sort of clocking onto that now, that actually we've got talent that wants more from their role. Of course, people want to be paid well. Like that's the fundamental reason why people work is to be paid. But also, what are the added benefits that I get from here? How is this going to help my career? And I think, and I hope that as the older generations kind of phase out and sort of our generation and the generations below us that take up the leadership roles, carry on practicing what we're preaching, because it's so easy to say like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but when you get put into a high stress leadership role and you've got like COC suites like screaming and shouting at you, it's so easy to switch and start conforming and not go against like your superiors through fear of repercussions. And we've seen that in psychological experiments sort of over and over again. There was that famous prison experiment that as soon as you put somebody in a sort of particular role, they start adapting to it. But I'd like to think that Gen Z and our generation are sort of resilient and strong enough and have more courage and confidence now to actively start challenging behaviors. And I think there's less tolerance for basically crap. If we look at the whole social discourse around Mark Zuckerberg, we mentioned this sort of pre this recording, Mark Zuckerberg and the masculinity like quotes that he's been saying in the press and on podcasts and things, he's being blasted by particularly from the content that I'm consuming, and he's being ridiculed. And I think that in itself speaks volumes around the lack of tolerance to this sort of behavior and this narrative that he's spinning.
Yeah. Yeah, because on that, he's referenced traits such as, so he's basically said very recently at the time of this recording that more companies need more masculine energy and they need to be aggressive, for example. Strange choice of words, I think. We've also heard that a lot of corporates, since the new election in America, have started pulling out of their DEI commitments as well. Do you think this is kind of like a sliding kind of scale here where things could possibly be getting worse in the workplace?
Yeah, I did see that. I think Amazon, again, at the time of this recording, recently removed particular things around sort of race and LGBTQ policies, like subtly from a lot of their policies and all of that. And Meta have announced that they're going to roll back on DE&I, but it was encouraging to see that Apple, for example, went against sort of pressures from some of their sort of shareholders to remove DE&I as an initiative or a focus initiative. And I think the language that Mark Zuckerberg used was to an extent intentionally inflammatory, because I think it coincides with the upcoming potential TikTok ban in America. And I think that's not coincidental that this is all coming out at the same time as that happening. And also we've got President Trump or President-elect Trump about to step in as well. And he's sort of famously quite aggressive and sexist and homophobic in the language that he uses, racist as well, whilst we're at it, amongst a whole host of other things. But I think because it's being pushed out, we are going to see people thinking, oh, actually, do you know what? I don't actually like that group of people, or actually maybe everybody is a bit of a snowflake, or this is that. But then I think we are seeing, again, a lot of social discourse to the contrary and people calling out this behavior, which maybe a few years back that wouldn't have happened, or organizations wouldn't start challenging behaviors, or people wouldn't start leaving Meta, for example, because of what their CEO is doing. So I think like the mass population have a lot more sort of power in this space now. But ultimately, people are still going to use Meta products. People are still going to use Facebook. People are still going to use Instagram. But I just think we need to see these people be held accountable, because otherwise you're kind of opening Pandora's box in terms of enabling inappropriate discourse and behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane when you think about it. I mean, because we all know that more diverse workforces are better. We all know that more female characteristics, such as empathy, are very valuable in the workplace, especially in leadership teams. So you would hope that people just think, well, this is just an attempt for him to get a bit of attention, maybe. I don't know. It is kind of scary, but how can we kind of push back against this? And how can we ensure that our workplaces don't become even more toxic?
Yeah, I think to the point that you just mentioned around having sort of diverse leadership, having females within the organization, and also the men within the organizations actually speaking up if they see inappropriate behavior towards women. We can't solely rely on like our female colleagues who are like, oh, this guy said something inappropriate to me, because for them there's a fear of repercussions against them in their professional careers. So if you see an inappropriate behavior, call it out. Say, actually, mate, like, what the hell are you doing? We don't do things like that, or we don't say things like that. We encourage sort of flexible working. We actually listen to what employees need. We create a safe space where employees feel that they can actually speak up against their things that they disagree with. And also we see leaders lead by example. When I did the talk at Cambridge University, so that was to a group of people known as the global leaders in law. They're sort of partners, general counsels of law firms, senior people. And one of them said, that's great, you're going on about the well-being of your generation and generations below you, but what about us? And I thought, fair play, you are, of course, under lots of intense stress. You have different stresses to what we have, but also you have the privilege of being a leader in that organization. So you can actually make decisions. You can actually say, let's do this, or I'm going to take this day off. You don't necessarily have the same level of scrutiny as somebody lower down who needs to jump through more hoops to get approvals for things. And if I see you, my superior, taking a day off for your well-being or because your child is sick, then when it comes to me taking a day off because I'm unwell, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable doing that. Whereas if you are working in the hospital because you're ill, you still got your laptop, you're taking calls. Well, if I've got COVID or a slight cough or I can't really come into the office, I'm going to feel less inclined to do that because you're working from effectively a deathbed. So I think leaders still hold a high level of responsibility in terms of the environment they create for their team. And also like simple thing. Oh, sorry.
No. I was going to say, so like, as someone in a leadership position, I kind of thought about this a lot and kind of tried to like research it. And I actually think that at the base of the problem that you guys are talking about, really what we have is a leadership crisis. I believe probably the single most important factor that's going to determine the culture in a company is actually going to be the psychology of those leaders. You ever looked into like the Gallup studies on like kind of productivity and you ever looked into that?
What's that? Kind of, sounds interesting.
The Gallup. So it's like a study that's done year on year, and it's looking into like what makes employees more productive, effectively, and what makes for better employees. What should businesses be doing? And what they found is the most. I've got some stats here, but basically what they found. Yeah. I think this is from 2023. So basically the objective is to try and understand what makes employees more productive, innovative, and committed. And what they found was the most important factor is actually having meaningful relationships, recognition, and a positive workplace culture for well-being. And what they found is in companies where people have a significant relationship at work, they have about 23% higher profitability as a company,
Jeez.
18% higher productivity, and 10% higher customer loyalty. They also have employees that stay for significantly longer as well. Because, one of the most important things to make you good at your job is probably to stay there a long time, because you start learning. And actually what they found is that managers actually account for 70% variance on those stats. So basically, to put it into an example with your story, then, so the person that was running the law firm, that was obviously quite a toxic environment, did they ever kind of lead by example, or did they ever admit that they made mistakes? Did they ever admit that they did something wrong, or what was how?
No, but do you know what the funny thing was, that this guy also, he like fostered children and he did so many nice things outside of work, but in work he was just a massive
The
dick.
beast.
and you just think, so you've come here and you've chose to be like this, which I found was more difficult to accept, because it comes back to the point, Jack, that you mentioned around the meaningful relationships of like leadership and stuff. And I think, to me, that doesn't mean being best mates. It doesn't mean you're texting and WhatsApping and you're hanging out outside of work. If that happens and you meet those people in work, because sometimes you make really good friends, but that doesn't have to be everybody. I think the meaningful relationship just means you trust them, you feel safe around them. You can go up to them with a question without fear of repercussions or being made to feel stupid. You can challenge them openly and fairly and know that they're not going to get defensive. And I think you're completely right that is so valuable, because a lot of leaders don't choose to be leaders of sort of teams and stuff. It's just the next step in their career progression, particularly on the sort of solicitor path. You have to manage a team in order to become a partner. But a lot of people don't know how to be leaders. So why aren't we training leaders to be effective leaders?
Yeah.
Why aren't we training them with the relevant skills?
And just to add on to that, so what I found when I was researching this, because I'm looking at it from a practical viewpoint of how do we create a good culture. But can you guess what's the factor that leads people to create meaningful relationships at work? Can you kind of guess what that is from your experience? Testing.
I just feel like, I was like, wow, I didn't realize this was going to be a quiz. Bloody hell!
No, I thought this was really interesting. So basically, it's a thing in psychology called vulnerability loops. So kind of basically, if a leader shows vulnerability, what happens is, if you show vulnerability, someone else will reciprocate and be vulnerable back. And what happens is it drops your guard, and it leads to kind of like teamwork and like team problem solving. But interestingly, it's the thing that determines really culture is if you do it in a high stress moment. So like if shit's hit the fan, something goes wrong and it's the leader's fault, or for example, if that leader in that moment says, oh, crap, I fucked up, it's my fault, that's going to then create a culture where everybody thinks that's acceptable. And what happens is if you do that, you start thinking about problem solving. Whereas if they sort of started challenging it and brushing it off and trying to make out it's not their fault,
or blaming someone,
then all of a sudden what it does is people put their guard up, and people think that's what you do here in this company. You don't dig into what caused the problem. You don't admit when you've made mistakes. And you just try and avoid it effectively. And the thing is, what makes a company successful? Or what is effectively, in my opinion, what is a company? It's probably
it's the people. Yeah.
It's a group of people that overcome problems.
It's like that. Yeah. When people say, "Oh, we're like a family here," and everyone's like,
"Oh, cringe."
I've heard that saying that a company should be like a sports team. So you're kind of supporting each other, which sounds a little bit better.
Yeah, that vulnerability thing is so interesting though, because there's a lot of narrative around the quickest way to get somebody else to open up is for you to share like a story about yourself. But I guess from a leadership perspective, you're not going to want your leader sort of trauma dumping on you, and you're most likely not going to trauma dump back. But if you take the example where something's gone awfully wrong, and rather than going in sort of accusatory mode and saying, "Oh, you did this X, Y, and Z," everyone just gets defensive. And if someone's like, "Oh, do you know what? Bloody hell, I messed up. Sorry," and let's move on and let's solve it. People are going to think, "Oh, cool, that's accepted here." So if I mess up, or I'm like, "Oh, bloody hell, I forgot to send that really important email that had to go out," I'm not going to fear being shouted at or screamed at. Of course, if you do something wrong, take the hit, but learn from it. But you're going to be more comfortable and feel safe to say, actually, I did do something wrong. And also that then transcends into the rest of your life. Then sort of outside of work, you just feel more sort of comfortable sharing sort of vulnerabilities, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of an ego thing in big businesses. I think when big money starts getting involved and it's millions and billions and that, I think people feel like they shouldn't make mistakes. But it's interesting because in that Zuckerberg thing that you're on about, like I did watch some of the clips of him on Joe Rogan, and if you notice, like he didn't,
podcast.
but when he was like challenged on it, I saw in the clips, I can't remember exactly what was said, but basically he challenged him and said something like, were you involved with this, or what was your? And he basically said, well, there was a team of people. I don't have anything to do with it. I have lots of stuff going on, and really, I think a good leader probably would have said, you know what, even though I didn't have anything to do with it, ultimately it's my responsibility.
Yeah.
And I need to take the flak for it. And do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like, on to your point, like, I'm just thinking like with this, like, leadership crisis that's creating toxic workplaces. I think ultimately it probably comes from we're getting like really right-wing politics at the moment.
100%.
Yeah. And I think that's setting a precedent with leaders. Like, I don't think Zuckerberg would be having this conversation if Trump wasn't in.
No, but you get the same from Elon Musk, don't you? And pulling everybody back and firing everyone at X now. And you just, I remember even there was a thing with Jeff Bezos of Amazon in the early days, and if somebody messed up, apparently he sent them an email with a question mark or something. This was a long time ago, and if they didn't solve the problem within like a day or so, they were fired or something. I don't know how he could have got away with that, but apparently he did. And you just feel like we're going back to that, and I just really hope that employees are going to be able to push back against this, because it seems like it's coming from those big billionaires, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I think that example of the Jeff Bezos thing, I've heard that, like, I think you can do that in a non-toxic way though, because like it could create a culture, because ultimately I think that's great.
Yeah, but that was
like, I made a mistake, here's a solution. That
was literally like, sort it out or you're fired. That was a bit different.
Yeah. I think, from my experience, I think it's quite weak leadership to just try and shout at people and ramrod them. And so it
shows insecurity. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but basically, like, you have to understand problems, and no one's going to understand problems if you're attacking them. Nobody benefits.
All I can think is that there is that, just to play devil's advocate, there is a possible problem.
I hate that phrase.
I'm sorry.
Whenever someone says that, it's like, oh, here we fucking go.
No, it's nothing big, but like, obviously you still have to balance the needs of the business. You could argue, I don't know, but there are those very small isolated incidents where you might get some people kind of taking the mick a bit. And, when they're working from home, are they really working from home, or are they like, getting the nails done, or out having a pint down the pub, or I don't want to make this gender specific, but you know what I mean? So I'm just trying to see it from the other side, if there is another side.
I also think, just because this is a big thing that I talk about around our employees that work from home actually productive. I would also say the same level of questionable productivity can also apply to the office.
Definitely.
In a sense that you can sit there for 8 hours and pretend to work. You can sit there for 8 hours and not do anything. You can sit there and chat, yap, eat, drink, whatever it may be, go out for a long lunch. I think those organizations that have issue with it or insecurities with their remote workers, the fear of lack of control. And I think that again is a questionable leadership trait, and not a good one. But just on the sort of the poor performance and easily getting rid of people, I think it was Meta or Amazon announced this week that they're going to overhaul, sorry, their policies around making it easier to get rid of basically employees that aren't performing, or meeting targets. So again, I think that is going to influence a lot of other leaders in big organizations, in America and also outside of America. And I think having Zuckerberg, Elon, and Trump all as this sort of like trio of dicks, basically, sort of kind of running a lot of America. You can clip that if you want, and post on socials.
No, I like it.
And post all of the what they're saying, the narratives that they're spinning is just going to fuel a lot of tensions and aggressions that we keep kind of coming back to every couple of years when this discourse comes back up. But I think there's a growing presence, the flip side of that, that's anti all of these behaviors in the workplace and otherwise, which obviously is a good thing for sure.
Long pause.
So, so what?
Very thoughtful. The thing I was thinking is, have you, Henry, have you ever heard of this Harvard's longest study on happiness? You ever heard of this?
I've heard of the happiness index, but I don't think that's the same thing.
No, but it relates very similar. I just wanted to bring it up because the way I'm looking at this is people that are listening to this podcast, running businesses, leadership positions in a company that's trying to do something. And I'm just trying to think from their perspective of like, you know, what if we're saying this is a problem, well, what's the benefit of doing things differently? You know, and there's this study that they did at Harvard, and it's the longest study ever on happiness. It started in 1938 and they're still doing it today. Gee. Yeah, and they've looked at people across all walks of life, all different demographics, and they're trying to work out what makes people happy. So they interview these people like every year for their whole life, basically.
The same people, or
yeah. And again, the main thing they found was that people who the thing that makes people happier is when they have more significant relationships in their life, and the reason they think that is because they're able to offload trauma. And it reminded me of, because I listened to your TED talk. It's very good, by the way.
Thank you.
But it reminded me in the TED talk, because you were talking about, you know, obviously you were sort of, I guess, had like, you know, getting some sort of anxiety and struggling with your toxic workplace. And I remember you saying that you had a friend and you were able to talk to them and go for coffee with them, and you were able to, I think you said something like, you know, it was like a weight lifted off your shoulders.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, that's effectively what it is. It's like we can't help but build up trauma in our lives, but when we get to offload it, that effectively makes us happy. It makes us more connected to people. And I think the risk with, or the problem with companies like the one you work for, in my opinion, is that people aren't able to do that. You know, so it builds up and up and up. And yes, it negatively impacts, you know, work performance, you know, because you left the company, presumably. So, you know, your performance, your contribution to that company is non-existent now, right? But also, ultimately, it's like, on a simple level, it's like if we can make people happy, you know, of course it's going to be good for the company. Of course it's going to be good for society.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just on the point of like my mate who like was really good mates still to this day, I feel like we're bonded for life now. But having them to be able to share like that experience with was great, because you see so many of the other people in the organization, everyone just seems like they've got it together. Everyone seems like what's the problem? Like, you're the problem because you're the one like crying downstairs and throwing up, and everyone else is just like walking away completely fine. So to be able to say to my mate, dude, like, by the way, this has happened, because they would have had no idea, because when I'm sat at my desk, I'm just doing my job. So having a mate to share something with, to offload, or even, I don't know if you guys have ever tried this, but I'm trying to journal. And just if I wake up at like 3 a.m. because all I'm thinking is all of these thoughts in my head, if I just write them out and just getting it out of your system, it just makes you feel so much better, because otherwise the thoughts are just in there, and sort of anxiety, stress, they have so many um like physical impacts on your body, your gut, and all of these other things that actually, when you get it out and you tell somebody, you write it down, it just kind of makes it more manageable. And it's not just you then that have that, which is why it's so important to sort of check in on your mates who might seem like a bit off, who might seem slightly more quiet, or they're not really like active in the same way that they usually are, because I think we never really know what somebody else is going through, particularly in the workplace. If somebody seems like they've got it all together, I don't know if you guys saw this, but in the legal press, towards the end of late last year, one of the partners at the firm that I was at, um, she just she was on the deal team that basically worked on the Everton sale, and she was on her way back down to London, and I think she was at Reading, and she'd had a few drinks because obviously they were celebrating a huge deal completing, and she just threw herself in front of a train.
Oh, God.
Married with kids, and this is like a high flying partner. She like achieved like really good successes within work and had a great sort of family life and all of these other things. On the face of it, seemed fine, um, and then takes their own life, and then the firm starts sort of you've got to start asking questions like, how is this allowed? She was working sort of 18-hour days back to back for like weeks on end, to get this deal completed. And no, I think somebody in the legal press from the firm said, we didn't think there was a problem because she seemed fine, because she was laughing, because she was joking. Well, nobody's going to tell you that inside there, like thinking all of these things. And of course, you can't be asking everybody all the time. But if somebody's working regular 18-hour days, they're not really sleeping, they're not really in a good cognitive state, you should probably check in on them, because that's the least you could do.
That's terrible. Yeah, terrible story. I just wondered, is it ever? I mean, there's a lot more in terms of what creates a toxic workplace. There's a lot more going on than just probably overworking. There's
Yeah.
all the other stuff we talked about. But is it ever for business people listening that are trying to grow a company and they're trying to get to the next level effectively? Like, is it ever acceptable to make people overwork, for example, in your opinion, from your experience?
I don't think you can make people overworked. I think that in itself is unhealthy, but there are times where you do have to work longer hours, or you've got a huge project deadline coming up, or you've got something happening. You have to work more. Like, we've all done it. We've worked longer than our contractual hours. We've given more on in law, like you work on the weekends, whatever it may be. And that's just kind of working life. But I think that's acceptable as long as it's not all of the time, but that you're also balancing that with making sure that the employees are supported, that they're being checked in on, that they're celebrated and supported. And say you've had to work late for a whole week, you say, mate, do you know what? Monday morning, come in a bit later, grab a coffee, we'll go out for lunch to celebrate all your hard work, and to make sure that employees are recognized for that, or if it's like added to their bonus or whatever it may be, just to make sure that this isn't the norm. But because you've really committed here, like, we want to reward you, then that employee feels supported, then they're more likely to go above and beyond in the future, then they're more likely to stay at the place and sort of develop their career. So yeah, there are times, of course, when you have to work longer hours, but it's making sure that that's balanced against that individual's well-being, because we all have lives outside of work. So if they're working more, it's detracting from everything else that they do, which again is fine on occasion, but it's making sure that that balance is there.
And I think as well, because I know on your TED Talk you talked about, obviously that was more about men's mental health, but you talked about when people are struggling and I can't remember the word you used, but things like doing like going and drinking like alcohol or taking drugs, like kind of
Oh,
avoiding stuff. Because
yes.
I think as well, because there are people that want to grow companies, and if you're a startup and you got something you want to do, like you can't really. It's very rare that people do that without putting in the extra time, and that can be toxic. But I think sometimes you can create a culture where it's accepted. But the question is that an unhealthy behavior for that person? Like you might have a team member that is like really proud and happy, says they're happy to do 16 hours a week, but are they really? Is
Mm.
that them avoiding some other issue in their life or something?
Yeah, I completely agree that the research shows that a lot of men who are struggling with their mental health turn to sort of substance abuse, alcohol abuse, or sort of isolation. And for a lot of people, work is a form of avoiding something going on at home or something else in their life that perhaps they've not sort of processed, and then it becomes overworking, and their life just fixates around work because actually they don't want to face like the real things that they're going through, so they can just focus their mind on that, which is why having sort of mental and physical well-being support with sort of employees is so crucial, because it can have such a positive impact. And it's something that I didn't necessarily realize. So I started therapy last year. Yeah, 2025 now. And honestly, I didn't think it would be like anything actually useful other than like the TikToks. I say like therapy changed my life. I just thought it was some whatever. And then I did it. I was like, whoa, actually. So like just talking about things, or having somebody just challenge why you said something or your behaviors, and you start having that sort of inward looking focus and think, oh, when I do that, this happens, or when this situation happens, that triggers me and I do this. And just being aware of that and being able to kind of like identify my own patterns and behaviors, which is why I'm a massive advocate of therapy, but fully appreciate that for a lot of people, it's not accessible because of how costly it is. So if employers, sorry, can offer sort of EAPs that give employees a certain amount of sessions, or can offer discounted things, then I think that's only a good thing.
I think you've like touched on it there, but how can we support men's mental health? Because I almost feel like there needs to be more of a focus on that, not to take away from everybody, but obviously that there's been talk about a men's mental health crisis, particularly with younger men. Isn't it the biggest killer of men under 40? Is that right?
I think it depends
That's
where
what
you
I
look at
heard.
it, but
Yeah.
it's generally under like
It's
60. It's one
yeah.
of the biggest killers depending on like the thing. But yeah, on the whole,
Yeah. I mean, because do you think it's because men, traditionally do not open up as much? They don't have as many close. I'm kind of stereotyping here, but
no, you're completely
they
right.
they
Yeah,
might not open up as much as women. They don't tend to have as many close relationships or friendships, maybe. Um,
yeah, I completely agree that. Sorry, you were still going.
Sorry, no, just basically like what can we do in the workplace to support men's mental health, basically? Because I think it's kind of different from women, possibly. Um,
Yeah, you're completely right in a sense that um again, like stereotyping, but guys, we won't generally just go out for coffee with a mate to chat. It's not like perceived the norm. Like you'll go to the pub, or if you are going for coffee, it's probably followed by like it's pre something, you're going on a walk, but you're not going to talk about your feelings or like stuff. You're just going to basically just chat rubbish. From my own experiences, anyway. Whereas women are more likely to go for a coffee and chat about what's going on at home, share, open up, talk about their partner, talk about kids, talk about work, whatever it may be, or the stresses of work, not work in terms of we did this deal, we did this, and this, which is what men traditionally do. Um, and there's more of a pressure to not say actually something's going wrong, that we feel that we can't share weakness because then we look vulnerable, then we look like we're not the alpha. Um, and I think to kind of counter that and support it from a workplace perspective is, again, it comes back to the point that Jack mentioned, Ari, the vulnerability point, that if you see a leader share that they're taking some time off because they've got X, Y, and Z going on, I'm going to feel more comfortable talking about that. When I spoke at Oxford the year before, Cambridge. Sorry, that's such a wanky sentence, wasn't it? But it was. I asked the audience like to put their hands up if they wanted to share any sort of struggles that they may have gone through within the workplace. Again, these are all like leaders within the legal space, and the audience, everyone who put their hand up was a woman, or identified as a woman. When that session was over with, there was a queue of dudes that were just like queuing up to chat to me and just share their experiences and say, oh, mate, I've got this going on at home. I've got that going on at home, because nobody wanted to put their hand up in the audience and show, actually, I'm vulnerable. And I'm stood on stage, like just sharing whatever, like I'm quite comfortable doing it now. But I think it was still a long way to go for guys to actually publicly say, because it is quite a big thing to share, particularly if you're not used to doing it. So creating environments where like guys can talk about this. And I find sort of sport or going on a hike or a walk or a bike ride is such a good time to have more sort of in-depth conversations, because the focus then of that session is not to go for a coffee and talk about how we feel, but the focus is on the activity. But we also get to chat, and then you get the endorphins, you feel good. So you feel a lot better in that situation, and you feel more safe, because again, the focus isn't solely on just the chat. And I think that's something workplaces could implement in terms of like sessions or like engagement sessions, activity sessions for people to do.
And I think as well, to add on to that, I think it's probably important for workplaces not to see this as like a sort of nice to have or a, you know, bottom on the to-do list kind of thing, or, you know, it's, yeah. I think it's obviously significantly more important than people realize, because it's not a must-have for pretty much most companies, certainly in the UK. But as the things we've talked about on this podcast, it obviously has a massive positive impact on the business as well as that person's life, you know.
100%.
So yeah, kind of. My next question was going to be, what's the most important piece of advice? But I think that's maybe what it is. But yeah, what is the most important advice for anyone listening, you think, when it comes to, say, men's mental health, or businesses when it comes to, you know, trying to not create a toxic work environment?
I think I'll do two, one for each of those strands. I think for the latter, I would say is you can still be successful and nice. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think for the men's mental health aspect, I think the biggest thing for me would be just to remind people that to check in on, it sounds so cliche, but just check in on your workmates and your friends. Like, you know them better. If they seem down or something's bad, just ask. It's better to ask and then tell you like, oh mate, like nothing, it's fine, than to not ask at all and something bad happen.
And I mean, as you're thinking, actually, I was just thinking of someone in my mind that I know. So
yeah,
but you know, maybe if anyone's listening and they're thinking of, you know, well, actually, that reminds me of so and so, maybe, you know, now's a good time to reach out.
Drop
to
on
them.
a text. Yeah,
being nice. Just being nice is underrated, isn't it? Like I like nice people.
Facts.
I need more nice people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you can still be nice and firm. You don't have to be a dick to get far. And also, if you're a dick, like, people will know that, and people won't want to work with you. And word spreads. And actually, just being nice it just makes you feel better as well. Like, why do you want to spend all your time being so hostile and negative? Cheer up.
Yeah. We like to kind of end the podcast by asking everybody that comes on, kind of, you know, where would you like to see the world in 10 years?
I think one of the biggest things for me would just to be um, it's just like a safe and sort of a safe environment for more people, and people are encouraged and enabled to sort of be their sort of true authentic selves. I think is such like 10 years is a long time away. I tell myself as I recently turned 32. But yeah, I think that's what I would like to see, an environment where people feel safe to speak up and be their sort of true selves. I'm sure there are loads of other things I could add, but I think that's primarily it in a nutshell.
And do you feel like we're on a trajectory to kind of achieve that as a society, or do you feel like, where do you think it will actually in 10 years?
I think we're making progress. I think we're seeing a lot more tolerance. I think things like what we're seeing in the US at the moment are going to cause some roadblocks, but I think that ultimately the sort of the nicer side of the planet, the people that want to see good will always sort of counterbalance that and help move things forwards, um, which is what I like the most. That there's always this kind of idea of hope and sort of positivity.
Nicely put. Guess that's the end of the episode then.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
No, it was good fun.
That was fun.
Thank
Yeah, thank you. That was fun. That was a good chat.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. We hope it was truly
Earth your while.
For more information, visit reuserbox.co.uk/earthyourwhile.
And if you'd like to appear on the next series of Earth Your While, please email media@reuserbox.co.uk.